I've been a fan of Ziak for a while now. Even though I don't speak French, there is something about his music and his music videos that I can relate. Recently, I decided to create this effect, the shot with the knives floating around him. It's a very popular effect, especially in the music scene, where artists are using it to create cool effects in their music videos. But there is a problem. I have no budget, no visual effects crew, just me and my visual effects experience. After doing some research, I managed to find the behind the scenes footage from the music video. That's when I realized this effect wasn't done in post. It was a special effect created practically on set. Now, in case you're not familiar, there is a big difference between special effects and visual effects. Special effects are physical effects done live on set, right in front of the camera on the shooting day. This can include things like explosions, smoke, rain, blood splash, prosthetic makeups, and in this case, props like actually knives rigged around the artist. Visual effects or VFX are digital effects created during post-production, after filming has been finished. They are used to add, enhance or create elements that weren't captured on camera, whether it's building the entire environment from scratch, adding creatures, extending sets, or even fully replacing characters. These effects are handled by a visual effects team after the live footage has been filmed. Since I couldn't physically place the knives around myself on the set, I decided to rely on my visual effects experience and recreate this effect entirely using CGI. The plan was simple: find 3D knives models online, bring them into the scene, and then composite the render elements into the real footage. This would allow the knives to float around me, just like in the video reference. To bring 3D elements into a live action shot is not an easy task. Studios spend millions of dollars to make these effects seamlessly in big budget films. The goal is to make something completely digital feel like it was captured by the same camera as the real footage. Every detail, lighting, shadow, reflection, and perspective needs to align perfectly. To recreate this scene using CGI, I designed a visual effects pipeline that would mirror exactly how it would be in a professional environment. First, we will create the live action plate, moving on to collecting visual effects data on set, generating 3D scan, camera tracking, export 3D scene to Maya, place the knives, bring the HDRI lighting, render using Arnold, and composite everything using Nuke. Since I didn't have access to a studio, warehouse, or an abandoned building, I had to rely on public spaces. Eventually, I found this spot that looked really promising. What stood out for me was the large glass background. I thought it would be cool to project the effect in the reflection to make it feel more realistic. After a few takes, Cosmin, this guy who was really nice to help me, did film the shot I liked. It had a bit of parallax, nice depth, and a stabilized movement. So after filming the plate, I captured an HDRI image using a 360 camera, which would allow me later to light the CG knives using the actual light from the scene. To scale everything properly in 3D, I use a process called photogrammetry. In this case, I use a free app called Scanverse to generate a 3D scan of the location. This scan gives me the real-world dimension and a rough geometry to work with during post-production. However, this was not enough on its own, and I will explain you in a moment why. Also, don't forget to log your camera details, focal length, sensor size, lens info. All of these are essential when trying to recreate a real-world setup, because I had to do two separate things: stand in front of the camera to be filmed and also create a 3D scan of myself in the same position. I approach it in two steps. First, I use a Scanverse to capture a 3D scan of the background. Then I took the actual footage that was filmed with me in the frame, and I used a software called Agisoft to extract a 3D scan of myself from that video. Now I had two different scans from the same location. Through a process called restaging, I was able to align and merge them in one 3D environment. Now I have an OBJ file that has both scans. If you don't know, I started my career in film industry as a tracking artist, and this step is very familiarized to me. I've done it many times, and here's a list of films that I worked on. The main software I use for this task is 3D Equalizer, which is one of the most widely used camera tracking tools in the visual effects industry. After importing the footage in 3D, I began by entering the camera details from the camera report, things like sensor size, focal length. Then I started tracking the footage, carefully placing points on areas with good contrast and depth. Once that was done, I imported the LiDAR geometry and began the surveying process. This step allows you to constrain and align the 3D geometry so it fits perfectly within the 2D footage. Now, the reason I had to create a 3D scan of myself earlier was because the software was struggling to distinguish between foreground and background. All my tracking points were landing on the background, which confused the software and make it hard to get an accurate parallax. By introducing the 3D character scan into the scene, I was able to compensate for the gap, and as a result, I achieved almost a perfect camera solve. Once I was happy with the track, I export everything into Maya, double check the frame rate, and make sure there was no spike or wobbles in my camera path. Now I have an accurate 3D representation of the shot that matches my footage. Since I couldn't afford custom knives models, I use free assets available on Sketchfab. When using assets like these, it's important to always check the scale, apply proper texture, and run a few test renders to see how everything holds up visually before diving into deep. Looking back at the reference from the music video, I wanted to recreate the knives floating in a circular way around the character. I initially tried using my mesh tool for procedural placement, but after a couple of frustrating days, I realized the tool was giving me inconsistent results. Some knives were facing different direction and it just didn't feel right. In the end, I ended up placing the knives manually around myself in 3D scene. Was not the most fun or efficient method, but it gave me full control and get the job done. After setting up knife layout, I imported my HDRI map into Arnold to light the scene. This allowed the CG elements to receive the same lighting as the real environment, which was super important when aiming for realism. With the lighting matching and the knives in place, everything started to feel like it's truly belonging to the scene. At one point, I got a bit ambitious and tried to recreate the entire environment from Ziak music video. From the walls to pillars to windows and overall room layout, I did all the modeling in Maya, then export the scene in a real engine for final adjustments, lighting and rendering. But as I start going deeper into it, I realized this extra step was incredibly challenging, especially for one person. So eventually I decided to step back and focus entirely on the footage I had already filmed. Here's the final version I built inside Unreal Engine. The foundation was definitely there, but there was still a lot of work needed to push the effect to a truly realistic level. Finally, once all the render passes has been finished rendering, it's time to bring everything together in compositing. If you're not familiar, compositing is the final stage in the visual effects pipeline. It's where all the elements, live action footage, CGI, particles and effects are combined into a single seamless shot. Most professionals in the visual effects industry use Nuke as their main compositing software, and that's what I'm gonna use here as well. To make things easier, I use the camera truck I created in 3D Equalizer and project my footage onto a card in Nuke 3D Space. This gives me a stabilized version of the shot where only the perspective changes, making it easier to create and manage masks. With this setup, I could break down shot into clean layers. For the reflection of the knives in the windows, I created a separate render path. I duplicate the main knife setup and rotate it 180 degrees, so now it looks just like a real reflection would. I started by placing the sky as the background layer, then added the knife's reflection render, and on top of that, I placed the window frame, which I had already rotoscoped earlier. This gave the illusion that the knives were reflected naturally behind the window frame. Next, I added a layer of knives behind my back, use a pre-made mask of myself to integrate them properly into the scene. And then came one of the final steps, placing the main knives in front of me to complete a 3D effect. After some color grading tweaks and adjustments, I ended up with this result. And if you compare it side by side with the original shot from Ziak music video, you will see it surprisingly they are very close, especially considering I had zero budget and I did everything by myself. thanks for watching. It was a very fun project that I did. I wanted to do it for long periods of time, this effect, and finally I made it. Let me know in the comments if you think I got close to the reference, and I'll catch you in the next one.